So let's start with this whole concept of feeling safe. In this case, obviously, we're not talking about physical safety. Right now, we all have certain risks to our physical safety. Obviously, we're all in the same boat in that respect. Some people are more at risk than others, but in this case, we're not really addressing those elements. What we're really talking about is a sense of emotional safety, emotional security. And as many of you know, as many of you have experienced, at least in some moment in your lives, there have either been certain circumstances or situations, or perhaps even ongoing ones, where we haven't felt entirely emotionally secure. And so when we look at what composes that, it pretty much comes down to two things. One is the ability to bring a sense of calm, security, and comfort to yourself. And the second is the ability to be able to exert some sense of control over your circumstances. Right? Now, we find ourselves in a particular situation where there's so much that is out of our control, and there is an enormous amount of uncertainty. And so if you've been feeling any mixture of anger, frustration, sadness, fear, anxiety, confusion, disconnect, whatever it may be, it's entirely normal. And that's one of the first things that I think it's important to say, is that we have, especially when you have loved ones that you need to protect and take care of, we often feel the pressure that we have to be okay for everybody. And there's merit to that. But on the other hand, if we're constantly pushing away difficult feelings, they'll come and bite us in different ways. And so what do we do in this moment? Well, I always use this kind of example, that imagine you're on a boat or on a metro, or on a subway ride, and it gets particularly rocky. What do? The first thing you do is you hold on to something. You grab onto something. And so one of the first concepts I wanted to share with you is this idea of being able to grab onto, to hold onto something that is safety for you. Okay, something that is a feeling, a concept of security in your life. And so what can that be? Well, the question is, what makes you feel safe in this world, right? For me, especially these days, it's been having a moment with my loved ones in the morning, with my husband particularly, some quiet moments of peace to just connect, and also in the evenings. Maybe that means having a moment to do some movement and feel your body in a healthier way. Maybe having certain routines that you have kept before and being able to adjust them is what makes you feel safe right now. So let's explore more of what those things can be, right? And keep in mind also something, we've never been trained in this. Unless you have been in a situation in your life where you have had to deal with anxiety or fear or stress in the past, in which case you may have searched out for help and you may have learned some tools and strategies. The reality is that there's no general course that's given to us as children or as adults for this kind of stuff. And so if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're struggling to deal with this, that is completely normal. Again, because many of us have not had the training with it. Here's a couple ways you can bring that training in, right? The first thing we say is, you know yourself the best. No matter whether you have a very rich internal world or not, you know yourself the best at the end. And this is an absolute fantastic opportunity to be able to delve deeper in that. Some people might find that frightening, considering the fact that we are dealing with all sorts of different emotions, but I would say the contrary. If you take a little bit of time to check in a little bit more with yourself in the appropriate ways, you can find that stability within yourself, I think, quicker and easier. And here's a couple of ways to do that. We work a lot with topics of self-leadership. So some elements of self-leadership, which is a rather ample, expansive topic, but certain ones that are particularly relevant here would be, for example, visualization. What are you visualizing in your head on a regular basis? Are you reading lots of news or hearing lots of news and suddenly visualizing catastrophes intentionally or unintentionally? Are you struggling with those kinds of images? How are you speaking with yourself? Are you criticizing yourself and pressuring yourself more these days with all the transition that's happening, or are you being kinder to yourself? And how would kinder be? How would it sound like? Well, imagine having a moment where it all becomes too much, or you just become confused or disconnected, or just fed up. There's a very big difference between saying to oneself, pressuring oneself and beating oneself up for those emotions and saying, you shouldn't be this way. You've got to do better, versus someone who says, hey, listen, this is a rough time for everybody. And so do the best that you can, take a moment for yourself here, and then let's go relax, or let's go disconnect in a different way. We call this talking to yourself as your best friend instead of your worst enemy. Another thing, for example, that can be very helpful is connection and affection and communication. You all are in situations right now, obviously, where you have to connect online more with your loved ones. Some of you have more experience than others. But what I would say right now is that a lot of people are isolated. And the worst part about it is that a lot of people are isolated and they're not actually recognizing it. And so one thing is being able to work remotely, but another thing is actually extending affection, extending connection, and asking for it from people in a more remote working kind of way. As well with those around you, extend a hug, ask for a hug, ask for that moment in the morning, in the afternoon, or when you're feeling overwhelmed. Reach out for others. One of the things that we have that is so unique about the situation is that, unlike other difficult moments in life where you may be rather alone with grief or with a particularly tragic or difficult situation, in this case, we're all in it together. And so it's likely that there are people who will be more open to offering, more open to giving, because they're going to need that in return as well. And so I really want to encourage you to consider about ways to just strengthen that communication, that affection, and that connection with the people around you, both in person for those you live with and online. And that can be something as simple as a WhatsApp saying, I love you, or I'm thinking about you, or how you're doing. Or even with a colleague offering to share something, or offering to help with something in a different way that you might have done before. The other question is, what comforting structures, what comforting routines do you have? Working with some folks this week, there are those who have very rigorous workout routines who have found themselves right now having to adjust those. There are others who are feeling utterly unmotivated and are feeling guilty about that. And so the one things we've been saying is just go slow, right? Go slow, but find the things that are going to make you feel safe in this moment, which is more important that you keep up semblance of something that truly is a comfort to you versus trying to push yourself to continue at a demanding level like perhaps you were able to do before the situation got started. The other thing I wanted to mention about safety is, we say knowledge is power, true. But as I'm sure you've been seeing, while it was very normal that at the very beginning of the situation, we were looking to get as much info as possible. Now there's a lot of folks, a lot of newspapers, a lot of toxic sort of media mongers who are taking advantage of this. And so one of the first things that I would also say in terms of safety is really limit the amount of media, which is not just news, but also social media, even, series that are apocalyptic or anything of the sort that might be giving us a kind of influence that is straining on our nerves. Because one of the most important things I think to realize right now is that we have these emotional credits. We all have these emotional credits on a regular basis, but we have a lot more right now that are being used up just to keep us together in the situation. If you consider that as sort of the processing of a computer, the processor of a computer, this is happening in the background. And what that means is that you may or may not be feeling it, but there's a lot more energy that's being used up just to get through each day. So things like a bit of headaches, a bit of disconnect, or more energy losses, all of these things are a result of sort of the underlying stress that we're feeling. So anything you can do to keep that at a minimum can make a huge difference.